Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Hi, J.R. Welcome to 2026.
Hey, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. A lot has happened in Wisconsin last year. We made it through the most expensive state Supreme Court race in American history. The legislature passed a budget and a controversial shared revenue deal. And many candidates got into the race for governor after Governor Tony Evers said he wouldn't be running again. As this new year begins, what are you watching for as like the biggest political story in Wisconsin in 2026?
Well, in the near term, legislatively, it's what they can get done. Looking long term, it's, looking toward November and what's the environment going to look like in Wisconsin and how's it going to impact the races for governor. Going to be interesting to talk about the latter first, that we're going to have an open seat with primaries on both sides as of right now, it looks like. So it's been a while since we had that. And also be impacted by Donald Trump. You cannot escape how much the president impacts the environment and drives turnout on both sides of the aisle. And there's a big question about whether voters will feel better about the economy by summer, late summer, early fall, or not. And if they don't, probably bad for Republicans. If they do, probably better for Republicans, because the party in power in the White House typically struggles in midterm election. So for Republicans, they really need to see voters feel better about the economy. Yes, there are lots of good signs out there about, the stock market, stuff like that, but it's all about affordability. And people in poll after poll don't look like they can make ends meet right now. A little bit better maybe than were a year ago in that regard in terms of other thoughts, but not getting any better or by a significant amount. And Republicans now are feeling that pressure of, if that continues, they're the ones who get blamed probably by voters for what's going on.
Governor Evers' legacy, I'd imagine, is in large part driven by his emphasis on, he really focused on public education, that he had that 400-year veto where he used his partial veto power in a K-12 student to increase school revenue limits. But he also really extensively used his gubernatorial veto to block the GOP-controlled legislature's agenda. What else should we know about Governor Evers' past 2 terms and what issues you think will drive the governor's race in 2026?
Well, he basically played goalie for the most part of his 2 terms in office. He had to work with a Republican legislature, but he shaped things in other ways. So he was key, for example, in the fundraising that the Democratic Party of Wisconsin did that helped a great deal with the Supreme Court races in 2023 and 2025 that flipped control of the court and then cemented the majority for liberals for at least 2028. So you can't ignore that. He used the bully pulpit to talk about things. Wasn't often successful in using that bully pulpit to convince Republicans to go along with him. But, he's going to leave office at least as we speak right now. He's got decent poll numbers. People like him. But you bring up that 400-year veto, that's going to be a big part of what Republicans make an argument about when it comes to affordability this fall. They're going to say that the property tax hikes that people saw across Wisconsin are largely Evers' fault. It's kind of a complex question because that veto raised the per pupil limit on what districts can spend between state aid and property taxes on students. There wasn't additional state money put into that formula, and that allowed districts to tax up to the increase the governor approved that veto, and that's a big reason why property tax bills jump so much. So again, Republicans are going to say, hey, your higher property tax bills will fall Democrats. This is what's going to happen if you have a Democratic trifecta. You should keep Republicans in power. Democrats, meanwhile, are going to make the argument that Republicans have shortchanged schools for years. So watch that argument. See who wins that messaging battle. Yeah, Evers, he leaves office or is about to leave office, somebody who basically was on defense a lot because the hand he was dealt with the Republican-controlled legislature and the maps that he had when he came into office.
Yeah, and you mentioned those maps. Obviously, that's a big story when it comes to the state legislature. To catch people up a little bit or to remind people, there were lawsuits by Democrats against maps that were in place that heavily favored Republicans. The state Supreme Court threw out those Republican-drawn maps, and then the legislature ended up passing maps drawn by Governor Evers instead of taking maps that could be drawn by the by the liberal-controlled state Supreme Court. That meant that in 2024, Democrats picked up 14 seats in both the Assembly and Senate. Republicans have an 18-15 majority in the Senate and a 54-45 lead in the Assembly. What's important to know as we head into another election year?
Well, just look at those maps. In the Senate, Democrats are fighting on a little bit better territory. If you look at there are 4 districts that really are considered in play this fall. Democrats hold one of them, Republicans other 3. For Democrats, win any combination of three of those seats, you're going to have the majority. In all 4 of those seats in 2024, Kamala Harris took more votes than Donald Trump. Now, doesn't guarantee anything in 2026, but tells you that even in a not so great year for Democrats, you got more votes top of ticket than the Republicans did. So probably a good thing for Democrats. I stress probably. We don't know what the environment's going to look like just yet in November. But you go through the seat by seat. Howard Markline, a Republican in southwestern Wisconsin, Spring Green, he's run up above the top of the ticket before. So that might be a boost for Republicans. Jesse James, who's an incumbent Republican, was drawn into a different seat, is going to run in the seat he was originally put into in the new maps against Jeff Smith, a Democrat. So gives Republicans a strong candidate there. So you can see individually how Republicans could win some of these seats, but from the macro perspective, the big picture, uphill climb, you can maintain control of the Senate. The Assembly, though, Democrats have a smaller margin for error. They got to sweep almost all of the contested seats and hold on to a few they won by the skin of their teeth in 2024. So a little bit tougher, but still there's an avenue there. And if it weren't for kind of a string of events under Governor Evers, you wouldn't have this. I mean, Evers won in 2018. That prevented Republicans from having control to draw a new map after the 2020 census. Again, Evers fundraised for the Democratic Party. It helped raise money for those Supreme Court races that then led to on down the line. If you had a Republican-controlled legislature and governor's office or a conservative majority of the Supreme Court, you wouldn't have the maps you have right now. That's a big change in Wisconsin. That's largely due to that kind of success of Evers and Democrats in raising money.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Okay, J.R., sticking with that legislative conversation a little bit, just to basically spell it out, half the Senate and the entire 99 seats in the Assembly. There's 33 seats in the Senate. So 17 seats are up for election in 2026, and all 99 seats in the Assembly are up for grabs. Can you just lay out one more time what each party would need to keep either the Senate or the Assembly?
So at an 18-15 GOP majority, 4 seats in play, really. Democrats win any 3 of those, they get to 17 votes. So, boom, they got the majority. In the Assembly, 54-45, they've got to pick up. They got to keep all 45 they have and pick up 5 seats. And that puts the kind of emphasis on calling majority makers for Republicans. Dean Coffert in Neenah, Jesse Rodriguez, the Milwaukee suburbs, Pat Schneider up by the Wausau area, Todd Novak over in Dodgeville, Bob Donovan in the Milwaukee suburbs. These are seats that they're kind of, decent for Democrats, top of the ticket, but Republicans have outrun that margin at the top. Dean Coffert, for example, Neenah, former mayor of Neenah, served in the Assembly for like a decade previously before he left and then came back. He's a little better known than the average candidate, so that helps run above the top of the ticket. Jesse Rodriguez, she's run above the top of the ticket. So those are folks you need to win. If you're Republican, they need those guys do well again, run and do well again to keep that majority. For Democrats, if you just get the voters in those districts to vote like they typically do the top of the ticket, it passes prologue, you're in good shape to win those seats, but it's not always that easy. It's candidate quality, it's fundraising, it's message. It's a whole host of things that goes into these races.
And have you ever seen the state perched in another situation like it is now, where you really don't know whether Republicans or Democrats will end up having the governor's office, and there's such, uncertainty at the legislative control as well?
Well, 2002, we had an interesting dynamic where it was Jim Doyle, the Democrat, running against Republican Governor Scott McCallum, who succeeded Tommy Thompson after he left. You had Ed Thompson running as Libertarian. That created an interesting dynamic for that race for governor. Republicans flipped the state Senate that year. It was an odd election in some ways because of the so-called caucus scandal, which is faded from memory for a lot of people, but there were campaigns who were using state resources and state campaigning on state time, essentially, to run their campaigns. I remember that situation. But yeah, it's a pretty wide open right now as we speak. However, again, it passes prologue. Republicans probably don't have a great year. It depends on how bad it is, and look, 2022, we expected to be a bad year for Democrats, and they had the Dobbs decision that really energized Democratic voters about abortion and changed the dynamic quite a bit. 2018 was a wave-ish year for Democrats. 2014, wave year for Republicans. 2010, wave year for Republicans. I mean, it seems like every midterm we have this kind of a wave-type situation. But again, 2022 is an example of where there was something we weren't expecting at the end of the year that kind of threw us a curveball. So is there a curveball out there that will impact how the environment looks in 2026? We'll see.
And you mentioned the Dobbs decision, and you also mentioned that the legislature this year is going to be focusing on still getting some things done in the legislature with the makeup that they have right now, as well as campaigning ahead of fall. But I'm wondering, what do you think will be like the most hot button issues and discussions before the Wisconsin legislature in 2026? Is it abortion, sports betting, data centers, something else?
Well, Republicans are trying to message affordability issues, especially going after Evers and that 400-year veto. Some stuff on property tax, expect to see that. We'll see how they do with those. The online gaming bill is going to be interesting. So this bill, in Wisconsin currently, only Native American tribes can have gaming, right? It's part of the combination of federal court decisions and the compacts that were signed by governors past. So they want to allow online gaming. If you are somebody who does FanDuel or whatnot, if you're in Wisconsin and on a Wisconsin server, you can't place a bet. They would open the door to this by having the bets go through servers on tribal lands. And there's a big debate among Republicans about doing this. So will they get it done? That's a big question. The tribes are pushing for it pretty hard. There are some conservatives who have angst about it. I will bet you if you put those bills on the floor of the Assembly and Senate right now, they'd pass. But that would be with Democratic help. The question is, will Republicans do that? They often want to pass bills only with Republican votes needed to get to 50 votes in the Assembly and 17 in the Senate. And there's some real questions that they can get there. And if they don't, how will the tribes respond come campaign time? Will they help Republicans this fall, fiscally speaking, financially speaking, when it comes to campaigns? Because, it's a priority for them. These are some big questions about that bill that really make an interesting discussion in the spring floor period.
Is it likely that Governor Evers would sign something if the tribes are on board with it?
He's indicated being open to it, I believe. So, yeah, if it passes bipartisan support, pretty good. But now, it wouldn't be the final thing. The governor have to renegotiate the compacts. There'd be sign off from the federal government. So there'll still be some steps, to go through. But if they can get it through both houses, it likely would at least get signed by the governor, and then we go through that whole process.
Any other big issues before the legislature this year?
There are lots of things. We're watching stewardship, which is this program that's been around for decades. It allows the state to purchase property preserve it for recreation and other purposes. The program runs out of authorization in 2026. There have been Republicans trying to push a bill that would extend that, but create more say for lawmakers and big purchases. That's a big question out there. Leaders have talked about regulating THC. Right now, we have kind of 3 different bills. One that would basically regulate it so that you couldn't get by if you're under 21. One that would ban THC products, and one that would basically treat it like we do alcohol, the three-tiered system for who manufactures it, distributes it, and retails it. Big question about that. But they have not had a great track record this year of getting things done. We're kind of at that point where Evers has been a roadblock on a number of things, and they're not really talking about big stuff. They could knock some things out. There's consensus from GOP leaders, for example, with the SNAP program to address the different share of costs, administrative costs, and also to ensure that we have enough people to check eligibility. Under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, they changed it. It had been traditionally that the feds picked up half of the administrative costs. Now it's going to be 25%. You have to reallocate money to that. There's also provision that federal bill to require states to stay below a 6% error rate for people in the program who are not supposed to be there. The Department of Health Services wants additional employees to run more eligibility checks. If we don't stay below that mark, we basically have to cover more costs of the program. So there's some interest in doing that. But, big earth-shattering stuff, we'll see. It hasn't been a great track record this session, them getting big earth-shattering stuff done.
Well, as always, thanks for your insights, JR, and we'll be keeping a pulse on Wisconsin politics in 2026. Thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on lake effect, and check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.